Hi, and welcome to Friends with Medical Benefits. This is our second podcast, and today we're going to focus more on Bill and a subject that unfortunately he's dealing with, and it's known as cancer-related fatigue. I'd like to kind of back up a little bit and start off a little bit at the beginning. Where did Bill and I start? Well, as you might have seen in our introduction video, we were friends from a young age, and we were kids of the 70s and 80s. Our days usually started off early in the morning and ended late at night, and they didn't revolve around cell phones and being stuck in the house with video games. So, I'd like to have Bill tell us a little bit about our childhood and how he saw it and how active we were and what things were like.
Oh, that's interesting because, yes, as you said, we're very active. And as a kid, I always said I'm not going to be one of these people who grows up and starts criticizing the younger generation with their choices, their music, and everything. But it is a fact for the reasons we don't really need to delve into them here. But kids don't spend nearly as much time outside. And when we were younger, staying inside was a punishment. And now it seems like with my boys, sending them outside is a punishment. So the mindset's very different. But the interesting thing, though, I think about it is we were both very active, but I was very athletic, but you were much better, if you think about it, at sports than I was. If it was all about running around, we were doing great, but you could just stand there and clobber me at tennis just because of the way you could place the ball. Baseball, football, if you think about it, you played organized football, I never did. But we were always doing something, and whether it was out playing wiffle ball or baseball, basketball, football, there was always something to be done. And even though I don't think either of us were ever major tennis fans, how much time did we spend playing tennis just because it was something out there to do? Didn't really cost much money. We could walk over to a park and play. So, it was a lot of activity. But as I said, when it came to the skills of the sports, you had it. But I had the athleticism to kind of cover that. I don't know if you remember. I always hated wrestling. I don't know if you remember. You were always trying to put me in wrestling moves. And I would just...
Yes.
So finally, and I always hated it. I would just sit there and let you try it. So then finally my strategy was you would get me in a half Nelson. I would stand up because I had the height difference. And that was my way to say it. But even basketball, I mean we were probably even at rebounding, yet I'm about, 8 inches taller than you or something. So it was an interesting dynamic. But it wasn't until after our childhood that I found the one thing I was good at, which was distance running. That was a little niche I found once I went, near the end of high school and into college that I was able to do. And again, even though speed was not my thing there, even as a distance runner, I did have that ability to run far and have stamina. So that was the one thing I took advantage of. So I did have some fun and success running in college and later on. But getting back, yes, it all came from that childhood of just always doing something. I can't. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, you always had the aerobic capacity. You were always the one who, whenever we were playing, you were the last one who wanted to stop anything we were doing.
Yeah. And I forgot swimming too, because you were a very good swimmer. You were competitive in high school in swimming as well. Whereas I just wanted to splash around in the pool and jump in and out and all of that stuff. But that was probably the one place. That was probably the one place your height didn't have an advantage. Right. Yeah. Well, my height, crazy as it is, height isn't really an advantage as a distance runner either. I'd probably be better at that. I would have had I been maybe 5 or 6 inches shorter than I am. 6'4" is not an advantage for, some people say, you got your legs up, long legs, long strides. You don't want long strides for long distance running. So that's not a thing. But yeah, but believe it or not, now I was thinking about this. I honestly think the first time I ever went for a jog was with you. I don't know if you were training for football or something, but you had this run that you would go up along the Susquehanna River.
Yep. And
come back by the bus station, the Martz bus station. Yep. And I remember that's the first time I ever jogged was with you. And I remember it was a struggle because I didn't know how to pace at the time. And, running was just go as hard as you can, as long as you can. And then I get out of breath and think I had asthma. But once I learned what distance running actually is, that was something that I enjoyed very much and was able to do.
Well, and then I unfortunately, shortly after I left for college, we lost touch and you ended up coaching running.
Yeah, it really worked out well, and I don't know if we want to get into how I got into running, the story there too, but and I probably should. I think because one of the themes that seems to be recurring whenever I'm thinking about what we're doing or when we do this is the moments in our life that we don't realize are big moments. That when you become reflective, there's people in our lives and moments in our lives that we didn't know would have a major impact. So maybe I'll digress a little bit here, but I think it's going to come into play with something we want to talk about near the end of this podcast. But when I started high school as a freshman, I went to mostly Catholic school. I went to 2 years of public school, which was the 2 years we were in the same school. But other than that, my whole schooling was Catholic school. And in grade school, I went to a very small Catholic school that eventually shut down. It's kind of why I went public school for 2 years before going back. But when I was in high school, there was, which was a collection of all the little Catholic schools in the area. I sat with a couple of friends from that original school, the grade school, the St. Teresa's, which hasn't existed forever now. And one of my friends, Brian, was always talking about cross country. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know there was organized distance running. Everybody just thinks running, you think track, and it's just fall track or whatever. But he was always going on and on about that. And the rest of us were like, all right, enough about this cross country. And near the end of my 11th grade year, I had to pick up my yearbook. And I can remember this moment, and it's a moment that seems insignificant at the time. But I went to grab my yearbook, and I'm walking the halls, leafing through it, and there was a layout of all the seniors. And it was a beautiful layout, colored photos of the senior picture with a little bio of everyone. It had their name, had their address, which I don't know if that would fly today, and every honor and activity that they had in their 4 years of high school. And it was kind of sad when I would look at the pictures of the seniors who had nothing after their name. They had no honors, no activities, no clubs, no nothing. And I realized in that moment, that's me. And a year from now, I'm going to be a senior graduating with nothing and my yearbook name. And I walked right over to the classroom with the cross-country teacher and signed up to run cross-country for my senior year. And that is seriously how I got into running. I only knew it existed because my friend Brian wouldn't shut up about it. And I only did it because I wanted something on my name next to my name in the yearbook. And that's where it all began.
Well, that turned into a lifelong love and part of your profession.
Yeah.
So obviously now we've talked a little bit about, we were active kids. You were an active adult. You were a cross-country track coach. You were a runner. Let's delve a little bit into chronic-related, cancer-related fatigue. So you don't know much about it. You don't have cancer. Then all of a sudden you deal with cancer. And we're going to talk about cancer-related fatigue. But the first thing I want you to talk about is, what isn't it?
Yeah, because it's easy to follow this with a great big duh. Right? Oh, well, I have cancer and I'm tired. Oh, I'm going through chemo and I'm fatigued. I just had major surgery and I don't feel like running around and doing handstands. And that's the obvious part of it that I'm not talking about. I'm talking about with a separation of time. You've recovered from surgery, you're removed from chemo, and yet you're still not back to where you were. That's what it is, but that discovery is really a long process, and I think getting to what it is going to kind of require me to go through a 5-year journey of really putting it all together, of figuring out what it was, and then being able to try to address it and attack it.
Well, then let's jump to your first episode of colon cancer. You have surgery on September 29th of 2020. Talk to me about that.
Now, it's interesting because I had, when you talk about a lifelong runner, it's really been sporadic depending on life situations. And one of the things about running, if you want to be competitive as a distance runner, is very time consuming. And sometimes when you have obligations, whether they're professional, family, or anything, it's very challenging. And so I had put on a little weight and gotten a little bit out of shape heading into that. what was it? I forget what year. What date did you just say? 2020, right?
2020. Yep.
Yeah, 20. Yep. You know my date better than I do. That summer, I wanted to lose weight, and it's for the first time in my life, I used the D word, diet. I wanted to get in shape. I wanted to lose weight. My way of losing shape used to always be to go running, but it was a little bit time consuming. I had some obligations. I couldn't spend a lot of time running. And that summer, boy, did the pounds fly off. I'm getting very cocky and saying, well, I can't believe I've been buying into this all these years that dieting is hard and it's hard to lose weight. Well, I didn't realize at the time I was losing weight because I had colon cancer, not because I was dieting. And what motivated me to get the colonoscopy and how it was discovered is really a story for another day. We've addressed it in our one video with how the league nearly killed me, and we're going to talk about it in future podcasts about getting a colonoscopy. But I have the colonoscopy. I learned that I have cancer. I get the surgery, and I have to have my recovery, obviously. And I've never had major surgery before, so I didn't really know what the recovery entailed. And fortunately, as a side note for me, this was during COVID, and I was teaching cyber school that year. So even during my surgery and recovery and diagnosis for everything, I didn't have to worry about getting to work. I just had to be able to get myself to a chair in front of a computer. So that was really something that was helpful for me in my recovery. But I started realizing after a point that while I wasn't being bothered by the surgery itself, I was experiencing getting winded very easily, getting out of breath, tired, especially in the middle of the night. If I had to use a restroom in the middle of the night, my heart would palpitate. I would feel winded. I'd struggle to get to the bathroom. I'd struggle to get back to my room. And I'm like, something's going on here. This just isn't right. And so ultimately, I decided to see a cardiologist because I thought it was because I was having heart flutters and that was my issue. And it was a very good doctor. He was very interested, very empathetic with my problems, and gave me a full battery of tests. I did a stress test. I took a monitor home and wore it for 24 hours. And after all was said and done, and he's going over the results and speaks with me, his ultimate diagnosis was that it was all in my head, and there was nothing wrong with me. And that was a powerful moment for me because I know something's wrong, and I know now that I'm not going to find out what that is, or no one's going to be able to tell me. And I made a connection in that moment because, and it's kind of funny, but in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, I worked nights a lot. I worked weekends a lot. I was very busy trying to put myself through school, and then when I was out of college, I was substitute teaching and working nights, and so weekends were always my big hours. But for some reason, in the fall of 1989, I had a couple Saturdays free, and I watched The Golden Girls, which I had never watched before. It had been around for years. And the only time I watch it, it turns out to be a two-parter, but I watched both episodes. And in the entire run of that show, the only time I ever watched it was a show about where B. Arthur's character is chronically tired. And she's going to specialists to find out what's going wrong. And one doctor tells her she should change her hair color. One doctor says, well, you're just getting old. And one doctor basically said, without saying it as bluntly, you just need to get laid. Okay. And her whole issue, so for an episode and a half, her big thing is, I'm always tired, but nobody could tell me why. Now, this wasn't unbearable. I could deal with it. But I just knew I wasn't where I was. Somebody who could run a 26-mile race in a reasonable time now huffs and puffs to walk 5 miles, say, or to walk 3 miles, or go on a family walk of 2 miles. And I'm having trouble keeping up with my wife, who's very healthy, but was never a runner. But a good marker for that is, 2 years later, when it was found that my cancer had metastasized, right before my surgery, we had already had a Disney trip scheduled. And we even asked if the doctor, if we need to cancel the trip or whatever. And they were like, well, you don't want to wait too long on this. But we were able to do the trip. And then my surgery was shortly thereafter. But I use that as only because it's a good marker of where I was. Because I was able to spend a day walking the parks with Disney, but it was very challenging. I needed to sit and rest. I might sit a ride out waiting in line involved sometimes me waiting at a bench while the family was in line, or just sitting wherever I could, or even kneeling on the ground. But it was the way I felt at that point in time was that I was 20 years older than I was. Right, I was in my late 50s at the time. I believe 57, doing the numbers quickly in my head, but I felt like I was 77. Just couldn't do the long grind, didn't have the strength to do a lot. And in fact, that summer, I tried jogging again. And it was only like a mile or two a day, but every day that I could, I would go out and maybe do a 2-mile jog. And I thought, okay, I'm getting myself back. And when school resumed, I ran into multiple people. I'm talking teachers, maintenance, students. And they all said the same thing. Hey, I saw you out for a walk this summer. So I thought I was going out for jogs, and nobody said I saw you jogging, but it was really slow. They all thought I was out for a walk. So what I was perceived to be going out for jogs was so slow, I was actually walking for a mile or two. And that's where I was right at the time of my second surgery.
And maybe some of that was the second cancer at that point too.
That's also possible. True. Yeah.
Hard to
I didn't know.
predict.
Right.
But now that leads us right into the second cancer. Now you've got metastatic cancer, and now we're into 2022, almost exactly 2 years plus right. Like 2 weeks, you're having a second surgery.
Yeah.
So now, after the first surgery, we had talked, you didn't have chemo. So you hadn't had chemo, you hadn't had radiology, radiation therapy.
Right.
Now we're getting the second surgery. Walk me through the second surgery.
And again, the recovery from the surgery would take time. There's a lot of other like subplots going on that we'll address in other times, and just limit it to the fatigue. But I actually came back from that surgery quicker than I was supposed to. And this talks, I can't talk about these last 5 years or so without talking about my teaching, because that was very prominent in any decisions that I made. And with the first being, fortunately, I had a job where I had accumulated sick time. I had a job where I could take sabbaticals. I had a job at a place with students, administration, and fellow teachers who were very cooperative and understanding, who were able to make a lot of these transitions smoother for me. But it just so happens that the year that I had this second surgery, for whatever reason, sometimes you just get dealt a good hand, I had the greatest schedule of students I ever had in my life. Like, it was just an incredible scenario where I loved every class. I loved going. Here I'm a veteran teaching now close to 30 years, and I'm feeling like I'm almost a beginner because it was so exciting to go. And then after the year begins, finding out that I have cancer, and knew I was going to have to walk away from this class because I was going to get chemo this time. So the way I had with sick days, with a sabbatical, and wanting to teach. So I had my Disney trip. I came back briefly. I had my surgery. And the plan was for me to start chemo in between Christmas and the New Year. So I knew I had December that I would at least be functional. So I went back and taught for that whole month of December. And people couldn't believe I was back, because it was really a quick recovery. And I felt better recovered from just the surgery aspect from the second one than my first. Maybe it's because my first surgery was local. My second one was at Sloan Kettering Memorial. I don't know, but I had a phenomenal physician, Dr. Alice Way, who did a great job. And I felt, the scars, the healing and everything went well. And I'm not saying I was full of energy, but I was functional enough to go back to teaching through the month of December. The plan then was I start chemo between Christmas and the New Year. After the New Year, it's close to the second semester, and I used sick days up to the end of the semester, and then began a sabbatical journey, which is going to factor in later on, because my sabbatical was an issue with coming back to work and my health and all of that. But, I'm sorry I'm dragging all this out without actually getting to it, but I think we have to know that to kind of know where all of this fits in with my health. And so my recovery, as I said, from the surgery was what you would expect. I'm tired, I'm weak, but I'm recovering. Almost back to where I was before that surgery, but nowhere near where I was before I ever had cancer in the first place. But it was December 27th, 28th, I forget, around that time. But in between Christmas and New Year, I had my first round of chemo. It was one of the FOLFOXes. I forget exactly. Kristen, my wife, always remembers the technical stuff, and I never do. So I just have to ask her when it is. But the first round of treatments went exactly like it's, I hate to say supposed to, because there are many elements that are different to everyone who receives chemo, and you can't always predict the responses. But I felt a little nauseous, under the weather, maybe a touch of diarrhea, but I don't know if anybody who's ever had colon cancer ever goes back to having a normal bowel movement schedule. If so, I don't know of them, but that was a part of it as well. But after a week or so, I started feeling a little better and getting a little stronger, so that by 2 weeks, when it's time for my second round, I felt well enough to get the second treatment. And I get the second round of chemo, and that first week was paralleling my first treatment. Feeling a little under the weather, a little weak, a little nauseous. The problem was, after that first week, I never felt better. There was no recovery. I kind of stabilized there and spent the rest of that week and going into my second round of chemo, with the mild versions of all of the symptoms. So I'm sorry. But then, so that second treatment, or the third treatment now, going in for the third treatment, I just never felt well. The diarrhea hit instantly, the weakness hit instantly, the nausea hit instantly, and by the time I was home, fortunately, because it was New York City, we were taking a bus and not driving, so it was a little bit better to be on a bus with restroom facilities and not having to worry about driving or being a passenger even with the driver. But I basically came home and sat in a chair and was useless. And I'm going to gloss through details because, again, the effects of chemo is a story for another day, and we're just kind of trying to relate it to my recovery and my fatigue. And to make a very long story very short, I spent a couple of weeks in that chair, getting up basically to run to the bathroom or vomiting. Kristen wanted me to go to the hospital. She wanted to call an ambulance, and I kept saying no. And it's just stupid pride at the time. But one of the reasons I didn't want to take an ambulance because I was afraid I would have diarrhea in the ambulance, and that would be a big deal. Which is dumb when you think about it. With all of the stuff that people in an ambulance deal with, that should have not been my worry. But ultimately, I believe it was January 29th. Kristen just couldn't take it anymore. She called an ambulance. And again, making a very long story very short, I spent about 2 weeks in the hospital with, when I say extreme diarrhea, it doesn't do it justice. I was extremely dehydrated because I was passing ridiculous quantities of liquid. I wasn't eating. I had to be on an IV to stave off the diarrhea, which was basically coming out more than the IVs that I was getting. But at the point now of being there around 2 weeks, and now we're around mid-February, I'm going stir crazy, and I want to go home. I want to get out of there. I'm kind of just saying whatever I can to leave because I just, you want to be home and be with family. And I probably came home a little sooner than I should have, but since I hadn't been out of bed for so long, the hospital sent a physical therapist with me to get me to walk. And the woman who came in was very positive, very energetic, in a very good way, getting you motivated. And she's like, I'm going to get you to, we're going to walk across this room. Well, she did everything to get me, situated in the bed, positioned, and I couldn't get out of the bed. There's a photo of me. She got me to stand, and for a couple of seconds, I stood under my own power and asked her to take a photo that I sent to Kristen to show her that I was out of bed and up. But I couldn't do one step. And she had to kind of change her goals because she was a very positive person. But this woman who came in and said she was going to have me walk across the room is now saying, well, this is a victory that you've stood, and we'll try to get a step or two tomorrow, and we'll take it from there. And I believe I was released the next day, and I'd lost a lot of weight from all of that, but I was still probably 190 pounds or something, or whatever I was. And Kristen had to basically lift me out of the wheelchair and into the car. And then when we got back, we had a walker, and we have, I don't know how long it is, but we have from our driveway to our front door, we have a sidewalk that's, I don't know, maybe 50 feet long or whatever. I can't imagine how long that whole journey took, but Kristen had to basically lift me out of the car, take me to the walker, and just walk alongside of me as I just slowly went down the sidewalk, then had to help me up the steps. And then I dropped into a recliner that was basically my home for probably the next 2 months. With, again, basically only getting out of the chair for bathroom emergencies for part of that. And then a physical therapist and occupational therapists were coming with me to work with me, getting me to stand, getting me to walk. It was probably well over a month before I could go up to the second floor of the house. If I ever had to go upstairs, I would crawl up the steps, and it would take me several minutes. But that's my low point. Okay, where are you coming back from? If you're saying, well, now with the muscle atrophy from the sedentary life that I had for all that time and the effects of the chemo, here's where I'm coming back from in the spring of 2022. Here we are now in the winter of 2025, and where is those 3 years gone? Because up to that point, that cancer-related fatigue isn't a thing. If you look at the surgeries that I had, dealing with cancer, dealing with chemo, this is what's to be expected. It's that comeback trail once I finally, because the chemo had to stop. Again, not long story short, I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time in this podcast discussing chemo, but for here, my body was not equipped. I had to stop. Fortunately, this chemo was more preventative. They thought that the surgery removed all the cancer, but they thought the first surgery removed all the cancer, and it turned out to metastasize. So the precaution here was certainly something that I wanted to do, so I hopefully didn't have it a third time, but my body just flat out rejected it. And the crazy thing too is the first thing you think of when somebody's undergoing chemo is how, the hair loss. And I didn't lose a single hair, but I would have gladly traded that. I would have gladly traded the hair for everything else that I went through. But if you take me into the spring of 2022 as someone who could barely walk, trying to be a functional adult, that would be the starting point.
Okay. So now you're kind of through the chemo. You're starting to work on your recovery. What's the recovery process like for you? Now,
one thing I didn't talk about going back to the first surgery, I spoke with my family doctor, I spoke with an oncologist, I spoke with multiple people about what is going on, why am I not getting my energy back? And, it takes time. And I love my oncologist too, but she didn't have an answer for me in this either. You've had major surgery, your body's had cancer and all of this, and it takes a recovery time. And in the same time now coming back with my negative response to chemo. So I started just trying to be functional, walk around the house, walk to the car, nothing major. And it was tiring. And that's maybe another thing I need to clarify. Once I'm recovered from the chemo, being tired isn't the thing when I talk about fatigue. It's more a lack of stamina. It's not, I want to go to sleep. I had a lot of issues with sleep patterns coming off my second surgery and the chemo and the medication and all of that. And it probably took me about a month for that to get back. But I did eventually get back to a normal sleep cycle. So I'm not talking about tired in that way. I'm talking about somebody who used to be able to just go and run 10 miles for fun, now struggles to walk to the car.
Right.
Now it's, oh God, I have to get up and go to the kitchen. And it, over time, wasn't really improving. Now, getting back to work, I just need to put that in to show where I am with all of that. And fortunately, I had a wonderful school district in all of that. I was originally approved, or I should say eventually approved for 4 semesters of a sabbatical, which is 2 years, but these were consecutive, but in the middle of a year, 4 consecutive, because originally it was going to be shorter, but then I had the experience with the chemo, and I was able to do that though. And what a sabbatical does is it gives you half pay instead of full pay, and it continues your medical insurance. And so I was fortunately in a position where that so many people don't have to worry about, which is insurance issues, money issues, getting back to work, losing your job, applying for government programs and all of this stuff. And fortunately, I didn't have to worry about losing my job and paying the bills. So that was a big thing. Had I had to go, if I had a warehouse job, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Even teaching, I knew I couldn't do. But I just tried to be a functional human, just basic things, while occasionally taking a walk. But this is where a half-mile walk would have me winded. This is even a mile after surgery, or after surgery, a year after chemo. Half-mile walk has me wiped out. Kristen likes to take walks, but I couldn't keep up with her. It was almost torture watching her have to walk so slow to walk with me. And ultimately, I just didn't do that often either. But fortunately, I had that recovery time. And when it really hits me is when I go back to work. But that's still a little bit down the road. But I also wonder now, okay, I'm approaching 60. How much of this is old age? But I accepted the fact I'm just not going to be that same person I was, that I'm always going to be winded. I'm never going to be able to run again or do any of those things again. And I guess the best way that I know how to explain it, which is, again, sometimes I just make weird analogies because it's just the way my head works, but I'm a very avid player of the Madden football game. And I'm not going to go off on being a video game geek here, but if you're wondering, well, how does Electronic Arts make Saquon Barkley? How do they make him who he is other than just looking like him? They have a whole bunch of attributes for the players in the game: strength, size, speed, awareness, a whole bunch of things. So, and then the numbers associated for those attributes are the best way to rate the player that they're giving that attribute to. And my analogy there is, if you were to take 54-year-old Bill and 59-year-old Bill and look at my attributes, my strength would be down a little, my speed would be down a little, but it was never that great to begin with. But my stamina would be, well, it can't be 0 because the lowest is 1. My stamina would be insanely low. So in a video game, somebody who might be a great receiver and is going to drop a ball in the fourth quarter because they're too tired. And that was me basically all the time. So if I were out in public and a pickpocket grabbed my wallet, I could have chased them down. I had that ability, but I'd be wiped out for the rest of the day. It would drain me. And part of and getting back to the Golden Girls comparison here, that was a big problem with the B. Arthur character, Dorothy, I believe, that she looked great. So nobody believes there's anything wrong with her. And that was me as well. And I'm not, and I know you're the same way. We're not like complaining. How you doing today? Oh man, I just can't get going today. I just try to put a positive spin on it. 99 times out of 100, if somebody asks you how you're doing, they just want to hear, yeah, great, how are you doing anyway? So I'm not a complainer. I'm not dwelling on it. I'm trying to be functional. I'm trying to be upbeat. So it looks like there's nothing wrong with me. I look great. Well, why doesn't he go to work anymore? Why is he on a sabbatical? He's perfectly healthy. I saw him in the supermarket, but what they don't know is that I was holding onto the shopping cart for dear life to be able to push it. Well, but part of the frustration. Go ahead.
I mean, that kind of takes us into what really the cancer-related fatigue is. And some of the characteristics are going to be things like a deep sense of exhaustion that doesn't go away with sleep. So you're sleeping well, but you're still exhausted daily, and it's multidimensional. It's going to affect your body, your mind, your emotions, and obviously you were struggling with some of that. It makes daily activities overwhelming. Like you said, you're forcing yourself to get things done that normally wouldn't have been a second thought. And they talk about it can last for months to years after cancer recovery. So, you're kind of fitting the definition.
Right.
I'm assuming during this time you're seeing your doctors, you're probably having blood work through the oncologists.
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah.
things that they always want to check for is, is there something else going on like anemia or stuff like that? And you're getting your blood work done. So that's not the case.
Right. Blood work looks fine for
Right,
everything.
right. So in all intents and purposes, other than the fact that you feel like a ragdoll, your numbers look good, you're recovered from your surgery, you've had your chemo, but you're not right. And I kind of related a little bit to, I was around in the time when we first came up with chronic fatigue syndrome for people who, this is non-cancer related, but it was people who had this deep sense of fatigue, and we were kind of blind. We had no idea even if it existed. And it truly did. It took time for us to figure out what it was and how to identify it. And at any point during this, did your oncologist kind of relate this to the cancer? Or were they kind of along with the cardiologist of like, well, it's just, you got to work yourself out of it?
Again, I'll make this parallel later on with the Golden Girls, because ultimately that was what her diagnosis was chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's the time period you're talking about when it wasn't really known. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But because I take I get a blood work and I get a scan back and everything is great, and I look and talk to them like I'm talking to you right now, it seems like, whereas I tend to downplay when I'm not feeling well, it almost sounds like I'm overplaying it, that I'm really more tired than I look and all of that. And I don't want to say people didn't believe me, but I feel like nobody got it. Like I'm in a world where nobody really gets how I feel. And as far as the name of it, that we'll get to that, I think, down the road. And one of the very frustrating things of this too is, I say this all the time. I'm 60 years old and I'm recently retired, but I'm not a normal 60-year-old retiree. I'm not playing golf and going fishing. I have 3 boys, ranged 9 to 16. Yep. And I, for the past few years, have done very little physical activity with them. I interact with them. I could take them places because driving is great, but I take them somewhere and I'm sitting watching. But running around and doing all of that. And, I have a boy, Alex, who recently has discovered hockey. Now, I was never, neither of us, well, maybe you as an adult, but we were never into hockey. I never watched hockey. I was never interested in it. He got a goal and a stick and wanted me to play out in the back with them and wanted to throw a football around. And this was this past summer. And it was killing me because I was saying no. I just didn't have it in me to go play a little hockey. Or could you imagine when we were 12, 13, 14 years old, thinking that when we're adults, we're going to have a son who wants to play ball with us, and we say, no, I'm too tired. And that's what it was. And that was tough to do, So
well,
what really, go ahead.
I mean, what was eye-opening to me as your old friend and, rekindling this friendship to this point that we've gotten it to, you did the video on your colonoscopy. And I remember us as kids, and you come to visit me when you were helping me with my first infusion, and you come in the door, and to me, you're a 60-year-old Bill, you're kind of what I would have expected. Yeah. And, you look good. It was great to see you. And then about, a month later, you dropped the video, and I look at the video and there's a picture of you in a gym. And that's when it really dawned on me, because we had kind of touched on some of your recovery issues. That picture of you were jacked. And I mean, when we were growing up, that was not you. I mean, you were always healthy, strong, but I mean, you were what I would call, you looked like a gym rat at that point.
Yeah, I was always that skinny guy who could eat whatever he wants and never gain a pound.
Yeah, you were the guy we ordered 2 pizzas and 3 of us would eat one of them and you'd eat the other one yourself and still not gain an ounce, and I'd gain 4 pounds for you. But that was eye-opening to me, because that showed me that over a short period of time, you had gone from what that picture is And anyone who wants to go back at that can look at your colonoscopy video. There's a great picture in you at probably, I would say, a high point in your physical shape.
Yeah, that was August of 2015.
Yeah. So, that person, without something happening significantly along the way in 5 and 10 years, is not going to, go back to, I hate to say, what I was expecting to see. After seeing that, it really dawned on me how significant this is. So that takes me back to, you're saying your physical activity is down. Where do you go from here?
So again, I have to refer to work, which is a marker for all of this, and fortunately being out of not working for a lot of this time. And so in the middle, so as I've said, I had my surgery in late 2022. Then I started my sabbatical in the January of 23 with the hope of returning in January of 25. And that's actually an extremely generous offer from a school district. I had to provide the documentation from my oncologist and the medical history and all of that. And so for a year and a half, I was getting the half pay and the insurance. But over the summer, heading into the 2024-25 school year, I got a call from the district, and they said, we could continue the sabbatical. We've honored it, and you could have your half pay, they said, but we're not going to be able to continue with your medical insurance. And with the health issues that I've had and the fact that the family is under the plan, I was in a bit of a bind because I didn't know if I could teach for a whole school year. Even if they had said, well, you have to come back and teach a half a year, and then, because I was going to retire at the end of that year just because of all that I'd been going through. And if they had said, well, you still have to come back and teach, then I would have had the summer off, come back for half a year and retire then, and I would have at least been able to pace it. And maybe I could have argued, maybe I could have said I have it in writing or made a stink and tried to get that time off yet. But to be in such a great district and that had done so much for me, I'm not one to rock the boat. And I don't see how I could legitimately complain that I should have my medical insurance covered when I haven't worked for almost 2 years. So I went back to teach for the 2024-25 school year. And I was terrified to do it, not because I had been out of the classroom for so long, but because I knew that I didn't have the strength to be a teacher for a full day. And there's such a different kind of tired that comes with teaching. And I've had many jobs over the years where I did physical labor. I've done carpentry, I've done construction, I was a dishwasher where I would work 10, 12-hour shifts, always on my feet. The easiest day of teaching, let's say as a veteran teacher, I went in and my kids were taking a test that day in all of my classes. It was very low-key, pass out the test, monitor the test. End of the day, I gather up my tests and I go home. That day, to me, is more draining and physically demanding than a day of pushing a wheelbarrow or raking leaves and cutting grass or putting up a house. There's just another tired that goes with it all, because you talk about multitasking. As a teacher, you're multitasking without realizing it. What's going on in the hallway? What is every student doing? Are they on task? So many different things going on that even the easiest of scenarios turns out to be tiring, because if you're tired for a day of teaching and somebody wants to say, oh, your job is easy and you're overpaid, try actually working. I've done both. And I'm not saying one is harder than the other or more important than the other. I'm saying for me, it was more physically demanding to be a teacher than it was to do those other jobs. Also, there's a big difference between your job is to make sure that that entire yard's grass is cut or that wall was spackled, and you have these 150 kids that you have to educate today. And so there's a responsibility along with it too. A bad day of cutting grass, unless you have an accident, isn't as bad as a bad day of teaching. And so I was worried about this going back, whether or not I could handle it. And it was also a weird school year. For some reason, it's the earliest starting school year I've ever faced and the earliest ends to the year that I've ever seen. So the end of the school year was actually still in May. But that first day, we're in mid-August, and the first 2 days are like meetings with teachers, and that's something I could sit and listen and go on my computer and work in my classroom. But the first day of having students was what I was nervous about. Well, after being, I hate to say a non-functional adult, but really outside of the dynamics of my family and going out now and then, I haven't interacted. I haven't been one who has reactions or interactions with people beyond at a store or something like that. And it overwhelmed me in how great it was. I was on cloud nine that first day back teaching. Our district just has excellent students. I'm not going to be one of those who talks, the kid's driving me crazy. I would have no right to do that. The coworkers, administration, very understanding and sensitive to what I'm facing. But I'm on cloud nine. Like, I'm interacting with kids. I remember what it's like. And I went home that day and I said to Kristen, you know what? I might be able to do this for a couple of years. Yeah, that was adrenaline. And it was the only time I felt that adrenaline in a 5-year span. I came home after saying that. I took a nap. I was wiped out. I went back and the struggles began after the high of that first day. And it's what are the dynamics of being a teacher? And what the teacher I never was the guy who sits at his desk, has the assignment up on the board, and then leave it on my desk as you walk out, right? Although now so much of that is done on the computer and so much of the work is done online. But the same concept. I didn't want that to be me, but I knew I had to be strategic in getting through my day and getting through my year. Once upon a time, because our sick days roll over, I had probably about 150 sick days banked up that I could have used or gotten a buyback when I retired. Well, I began that year with 10. That's how far it had dwindled, with some family medical concerns that aren't really an issue for today. My medical issues depleted almost all of my sick days. Otherwise, I would have been in a situation where with doctor approval, I could have come back to work and then technically gotten that time off. And again, not trying to manipulate a loophole, just trying to get through a year, me being able to do it, but not cheating my students as well. And that was really a whole year of my teaching strategy was, how do I do today because I'm exhausted after 2 periods? I even had, because of a quirk in scheduling, I taught an elective in the afternoon, and I had one student who had me first period and had me in the afternoon. And I would even ask him, do you see a difference in me in the afternoon and in the morning? He's like, yeah, big difference, because I had that energy to welcome the class and present my lesson, but that didn't last. And, I was just trying to make it to lunch. And then at lunch, I would just have lunch in my room and sit there and try to recover and then go back to my remaining classes. But I've seen incompetent teaching, not really where I am now, but as a student and in my journeys as a substitute teacher. And I wasn't incompetent. They weren't just coming there and sitting around and I was like, I don't care what you do today. But they were also not getting the education that I felt they deserved. So much, as I said now, is computerized. I was leaving assignments in a Google Classroom for them to do. I was grading their assignments. And for many classes on many days, it was my students coming in with their laptops, finding the assignment and doing it. Accurate roll was taken. There was safety. There were no discipline issues. There was accountability. There were grades. Material was being covered. But I know I'm not inspiring anyone. I'm not changing lives here. I'm not, just like you said, you knew it was time to retire from being a doctor because it was a disservice to your patients. Although no one was going to die in my classroom, I also knew that at the end of the year, they weren't getting what they should have been getting as students. But I knew I had to get through that year. So, I mean, and I was observed by administration, not because I was in trouble, but because that's a typical thing where you need to be evaluated. And I did well with that. I had a lesson planned and students interacted with me and I had the students' respect and all of that. But I also know I wasn't the teacher who was, I mean, I sat at my desk the whole period and that wasn't me normally. So it was all an exercise in how do I make it to the bell? How do I get to the end of the last period? And that was my last year of teaching, was strategically using the sick days that I had to try to recover. I did have a little illness and I fortunately had some sick days to use. But when I ultimately retired, I had 0 sick days left. And that was from at one time having about 150 of them. But as I've said, I'm saying that I'm sick. I'm saying that I'm fatigued. I'm saying that I can't do this. And everybody says the same thing when I talk to them. You look great, right? I didn't lose my hair. At my age, I don't really have grays. I look like I'm fit. So as I've said, I don't think anybody knows that struggle that I had. But my defining moment, if there's an epiphany or a moment or whatever it is, it was either late winter or early spring on my lunch break. I made up a term. It's the term you've just used, but I made it up because I had never heard it before. Cancer-related fatigue. I just was ready to crash. I had half a day left. I had months of teaching left. I'm at my wit's end because I don't think I could go any further. And I just type in cancer-related fatigue to Google. I hit enter, and I get the Google AI response. And it was life-changing because there it was. The name that I made up was a thing.
Yep.
A thing that no one had said to me for all the people I spoke with. So getting back to the chronic fatigue syndrome and the Golden Girls episode, when a doctor diagnoses her and gives it a name, it changed everything for B. Arthur's character, even though she was still sick. And she's celebrating when the doctor's telling her this and is like, why are you happy? And she's like, I have a name for this. I have something. I know what it is. I could describe it. Maybe we can address it. Maybe we could treat it. And that was the same thing for me. Like, I'm not going crazy. This exists. In fact, the name I gave it is the name that it has. And part of me is thinking, how did no one ever tell me, hey, this is what you have? And I think it's kind of like chronic fatigue syndrome was battles that people have had with Lyme disease, things that exist but aren't really given credit for existing. And I have the printout in front of me because it's probably not word for word what I saw that day, but I fit everything but one. I'm reading this and I'm almost getting chilled. A deep, overwhelming physical, emotional, cognitive tiredness, exhaustion.
Yep.
Right? That's what I felt always. Difficulty with daily tasks, even short walks or climbing stairs. Fits me to a T. Muscle weakness and shortness of breath. Again, strong enough to lift a heavy box if I have to? Yeah. But then I'm done for the day. Right? We have a water cooler in the house, and a couple of months ago I went to get 5-gallon waters, and I carried two 5-gallon water tanks in at the same time. I was done for the rest of the day. My legs were sore a day later from carrying that water. So again, fitting it perfectly. Can develop gradually or suddenly and last months or years. And I think that's the big one. Because anyone who has cancer, anyone who has major surgery, and anyone who has chemo is going through a period of fatigue and slow recovery. With me, that final recovery never happened. So we're nearly an hour into this podcast with plenty more to say. So we're going to split this up into 2 episodes. So thanks for joining us. And on behalf of John, thank you for watching Friends with Medical Benefits. And we like to release our podcast every other Wednesday, which leaves part 2 to actually fall on Christmas Eve. And we're going to stay with that schedule. And if you're busy with the holidays, there should be plenty of time between Christmas and the New Year to give our next one a viewing. And we appreciate your support. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.